I'm Adam Fogarty, and I am a local citizen journalist just trying to get the word out about things that the media and the medical establishment is not telling you about what's happening not only with this particular pandemic, but also pandemics in the past in terms of what was the solution, how did we get out of those pandemics. Anybody can go to the historychannel.com or just type into DuckDuckGo or any other search engine, History of Pandemics, History Channel. And it's going to show you all of the global pandemics in recorded history that have ever occurred. And it's going to describe to you what happened in terms of what they think was the disease that caused that pandemic, and how many people died in that pandemic. And the thing that really jumps out when you look through this list of past pandemics is that there really were only just a couple of major heavyweight pathogens that created the overwhelming majority of death. By far, the bubonic plague has been the deadliest pathogen to produce the most horrifying pandemics in world history that you could even conceive of, even begin to conceive of. The Black Death, which was produced by the bubonic plague, killed 1/3 of the population of the globe. Imagine that. You're in the middle of this situation in which nearly every 1 out of 3 people you know is dead or dying or going to die. Had those people been told that you're just going to have to hang in there with this until the vaccine comes out, they would still actually be waiting, because there has never been a safe or effective vaccine for the bubonic plague. It's still, to this day, doesn't exist. We live with plague. It's kind of strange, but there are various forms. There's pneumonic, there's bubonic. Most deadly form is pneumonic, but the one that's done the most damage from what I can tell from these past pandemics is the bubonic plague. They're all horrible, they're all deadly, and they're still carried by animals in the Pacific Southwest and in some states up north. And yet, for reasons having nothing at all to do with the vaccine, people don't get sick with it. Unfortunately, people do get sick with the plague in sub-Saharan Africa and Madagascar, where this is still a problem. And that's kind of another topic for another day to get into the details of that. Imagine if you can, says Rod Serling, imagine if you can. Just imagine a disease so deadly you don't even know you have it until you're tested. Just imagine that there could be a disease so deadly that you don't even know you have it until you get tested. Just imagine we lived in that world. For one moment, just pretend like we're living in this Twilight Zone realm. We have a situation where if you go down the history of each and every single one of these pandemics, not one of them was ended by a vaccine. So never before in human history has a vaccine ended a pandemic. And yet we all have it in our heads that it's the only thing we can count on to end this particular pandemic we're living in right now. And what is that belief based on? There's absolutely no historical precedent to support that belief on any level. This is true not only of global history, this is also true of recent history, because COVID-19, also known as SARS-CoV-2, had a preceding iteration called SARS-CoV-1, which did produce a pandemic. 774 people died, and it ended all on its own with no vaccine. So this is our recent history with SARS-CoV-1. And still, we have it in our heads that we just can't get out of this. There's no way, it's not possible, we need a vaccine. And that's being drummed up. It's not based in any facts. It's not based in anything other than people who want you to think a certain way so that they can take you to the Twilight Zone. And in this world, you can't go anywhere without a mask, or you'll be threat. In this world where they're trying to take you, if you haven't had the vaccine, you'll be as ostracized as if you had two heads. And they're going to know about it because they've got the technology. This is the world that they're trying to take us into. And the question is going to be for each and every one of us, am I going to walk into that world? Am I going to walk into that world? Or am I going to take advantage of the free speech that I still have left to speak truth, which is like words of truth are like rays of sunshine that allow people to see what's really going on. And the sad truth is we aren't getting these rays of light from our major corporate news stations. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is very plainly stated by Bobby Kennedy Jr., who was out to breakfast with a top executive, he didn't name the name, of a major news division. And that executive told him, he looked at him, he said, Bobby, I don't know if he said it like that exactly, but he said, hey, Bobby, something like that. He said, yeah. He said, did you know that in non-election years, 70% of the ad revenue that we receive at this particular division is paid to us by the pharmaceutical industry? He said, yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, gosh, they must be pretty powerful, huh? Yeah, they're really powerful. They must have a lot of say-so over what your network employees have to say on the air, huh? Yeah, they do. You might even say they script it. You might even say that they really are just an extension of the very same industry, almost like a public relations department of the pharmaceutical industry. And these are the people who are giving us our information that we turn to in a really dark and twisted and confusing time like we're living in right now. So how do we find our way out of it? The only way we can find our way out of this is to find the sunlight, is to find those words of truth which allow us to see what's really going on. And they are like the breath of life, which allow us to breathe in a society in which tyranny is closing in on us on all sides. So, as Albert Einstein said, learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is to not stop questioning. So one question that you're going to get a lot is, well, Adam, what about polio? Wasn't that a pandemic ended by a vaccine? And that's another topic for another day, but it was not a pandemic. It was an epidemic. It was not a pandemic. If people have more questions about that, I'd be happy to discuss it after the presentation, but it's not a pandemic, so it's not within the framework of what I'll be discussing today. So people might be thinking these past pandemics, so maybe they wouldn't have been as deadly. You know, maybe a third of the global population during the Black Death, maybe it'd only been half if we'd had a vaccine. And that statement on its face is maybe true and it's maybe false. Which conclusion do we have evidence for? Evidence is of course, the key word. So most of the pandemics were caused by pathogens which we did not have a vaccine for at the time. In fact, many of them we were never able to develop a vaccine for. This is not just the case with bubonic plague. It's also the case with cholera, which has a vaccine that most people would never get. It's also the case with typhoid fever. Those waterborne illnesses, cholera, typhoid fever, they've never been able to develop a vaccine that works for them because their waning immunity is so short that you would literally have to get re-shot something like once a month. You know, it would just be astonishingly inefficient. Leprosy, AIDS, these are pandemics which never produced a vaccine. Of course, SARS-CoV-1 never produced a vaccine. So the only thing we can count on to end the pandemic is a SARS-2 COVID vaccine. Is just not based in sense. History does not give us any support for this idea whatsoever. Not a single pandemic in world history has ever ended because of a vaccine. So here's the next question. What about smallpox? And that's a fair question, because smallpox is an example of a disease that did produce a pandemic, which did end at a time in history when a vaccine existed. It's actually the only one, okay? But did it really cause that pandemic to end is another question that people don't ask. You can look into the vital statistics from the United Kingdom from 1864 moving forward. You can look at the vital statistics in the United States of America from 1900 moving forward. There's vital statistics for Germany, Switzerland, and several other countries from within Europe. And they all are very, very crystal clear, consistent as consistent can be, in showing a declining death rate to all of the infectious diseases, not just smallpox, beginning in and around the year 1870, which was when the cities, which had been created as a result of the Industrial Revolution and the Enclosure Act and laws like them, which forced people off their land into cities where they had to live in factories. And now you have this infrastructure which is entirely overwhelmed to the point where human and animal feces is in the water, it's in the streets outside people's homes, which are of course not paved, which are dirt roads. These are third world conditions which did indeed exist in what we call first world cities at this time in history, and people do not realize that. So this was the environment that gave rise to this cholera pandemic, to this smallpox pandemic. Scarlet fever was more deadly. It was more deadly than smallpox in a big way. And the graph is very clear. You can see that the mortality rate changed through time. It would increase and then it would decrease. It would increase and then it would decrease. Exactly in line with scarlet fever and smallpox. So there is evidence that there were other things affecting all of these diseases that was causing them to increase in their mortality rate and also to decrease in their mortality rate. And I've done presentations on water, in particular, cleaning up sewerage. We have engineers, we have plumbers to thank for getting us out of this dark, disgusting, disease-producing world that our people used to live in. And that is what changed in the 1870s, and it's very clear that it has a strong association with decreased mortality to literally every single recorded infectious disease, which seems kind of interesting because a lot of those diseases are actually airborne pathogens. So why would clean water make a difference? I can't directly answer that question. I can only tell you that you see the same declining trend among diphtheria, among pertussis, among pneumonia, as you do among other diseases which are contracted through other means. But underneath all of it is water. Now, keep in mind, they weren't just cleaning up water. There were also laws which were forcing factories out of the cities. So the pea soup air that people were breathing, as they are still today in Wuhan and other cities in China and around the world, was expelled out to the countryside where people could breathe cleaner, fresher air, which of course was also producing wellness in their physiology as well. So all of us should just give a moment sometime today in our hearts, in our minds, to thank a plumber, thank an engineer, because these men and women are the ones who brought us into the first world. And we could do the same thing for people in the third world today if we would accurately and honestly describe our history instead of pretending like it had everything to do with vaccines, when the truth is there was only one vaccine that even existed in the days when this trend began to reverse. So there's a lot of other factors. We talked about there were soup kitchens, better nutrition, stricter zoning laws, hygiene habits changed, anti-crowding laws. There were legitimately progressive laws that came into existence to force factories out of the city, slaughterhouses out of people's neighborhoods, to limit the number of people who could live in a tenement so they weren't crowding in on top of each other too closely, which produces disease. So there were many things that changed. There are other factors that do appear to be combining with COVID-19 to make it a far more deadly virus. And there's a lot of research that I would recommend people who are interested look into in relation to glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. GMO foods, it's all tied together, and it's not spelled with an F because it's not food. It's spelled PHOODS. Also, it reacts. There is evidence that the virus is made more viral in the presence of EMF radiation, such as 5G radiation and radiation from other sources. It also seems to viciously contraindicate with certain medications. So there are a lot of published research papers in relation to nutraceutical solutions that people can turn to for wellness so that they can avoid getting sick in the first place. And according to Dr. Lee, who wrote the book Curing the Incurable in relation to vitamin C, can also be used, in his words, to treat or even cure diseases. Those are not my words. That's Dr. Lee, who's the author of Curing the Incurable. We've got beta-glucans from mushrooms, which build the immune system quite effectively, according to several studies. Glutathione inhibits viral replication in many viruses. It's been proven to work in the Zika virus by Albert Crum, who has an amazing history. He's actually from Omaha, Nebraska. There was another study written by a fella by the name of Anthony Fauci. And what did he discover? He actually discovered in 1992 that glutathione inhibits the replication of the AIDS virus. Isn't that interesting? And he never even mentioned it to you, that maybe this could work for SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. Never even mentioned that. Nor did he mention that Harvard University in the Harvard Gazette has confirmed vitamin D protects against colds and flus. Never mentioned. Zinc and quercetin, which is in elderberries and blueberries, also can inhibit COVID-19 viral replication. Zinc and hydroxychloroquine and other antiviral medications. It's become a real buzzword, and everybody likes to make fun of hydroxychloroquine, but in South Korea, it's a standard of care, and they have the lowest mortality rate in the world. So maybe they're doing something right. Could that possibly be? There was a point in human history, if you go along with the idea that Homo sapiens followed from Homo erectus, when our species was nearing extinction. We nearly went extinct. It was this close. And the prevailing theory is to reasons other than disease. It wasn't a disease. It was something else. And so while we're being trained to be so absolutely terrified of disease, are we being distracted from a far graver concern? Wouldn't it be Twilight Zone-y if that concern was the very cure that's being thrown at us? According to Barbara Starfield, who is an amazing woman, God rest her soul, published, makes me want to cry. She published an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association in the year 2000, which revealed 225,000 iatrogenic deaths per year on average in the United States of America. Iatrogenic deaths are deaths caused by doctors. They're deaths caused by medicine. They're deaths caused by hospital errors. Okay, at this point in time, our COVID deaths in the United States of America are at 103,339. Our iatrogenic deaths every year clock in at 225,000. So it's looking like more people are going to die to doctors in hospitals and errors in hospitals than to COVID itself. But the media tells me these are the guys I need to turn to for my answers. These are the guys I need to go to solve my problem. Is that really true? The media also tells me that smallpox has been eradicated all because of a vaccine. Well, maybe it should cross your mind that maybe the pharmaceutical lobby, which pays 70% of their advertising dollars, makes it just about impossible for them to say anything at all, ever, to criticize them. That division could cease to exist in a split second if the industry decided to cut them off. They're done. The media has told us a lot of lies throughout history. They told us that the Spanish bombed the Maine. They told us that the Germans torpedoed the Lusitania for no reason at all. They told us there was no warning before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. They tell us that the Viet Cong attacked the US Navy in the Gulf of Tonkin. They tell us that Saddam Hussein has the means and intention to attack the USA at any moment. They told us that the Russians colluded with the 2016 Trump campaign, and there was never a shred of evidence for any of this. And it led to wars. It led to millions of deaths. Literally millions of people died over these lies. So maybe the media is lying once again about the COVID situation. If so, we really need to start speaking the truth while we still can, because lies of omission are as dangerous as lies of commission. Teaching people that vaccines are the reason why we got out of our dreadful era of pandemic after pandemic, cholera pandemic after cholera pandemic, bubonic plague pandemic after bubonic plague pandemic, typhoid fever pandemic, in a hell world that none of us can even imagine living in, had everything to do with vaccines, is a lie of commission. The lie of omission is failing to educate the public to the value of clean water and how significant it is in reducing death to infectious diseases across the board. Of course, clean water combined forces with other factors to rid the first world cities of diseases. Scarlet fever dropped from being an extremely deadly disease to almost, you might meet people who've had scarlet fever, but it's pretty rare nowadays. It was at one time rampant. And guess what? I'm just going to give you one guess. Guess what there's never been for scarlet fever? Never has ever been. What? That's what it is. There has never, ever been, ever has there been a vaccine for scarlet fever, and yet its diseases, its death, mortality rate dropped out of the sky in accord with every other infectious disease. This was due to other factors. It had to have been. You cannot give a vaccine a credit, a vaccine that never existed, credit, right? It's magical thinking. It's not logic. It's not logos. That's the type of thinking that they want you to find on the other side in the twilight zone. But we need to unwind back the other direction to logos, and we need to stand our ground and speak truth and stay on this side of the twilight zone. So it's easy to see that airborne diseases like diphtheria travel down the same declining path of deaths through time. Also pertussis, also pneumonia, which didn't have a vaccine until 1977. The death rate had dropped, I don't know the percentage, but on the graph it's clear that it had dropped a significant amount. In Los Angeles, there was a typhus epidemic last year that was created when their sewage system essentially backed up as a result of too many homeless people were, creating problems, and it created an epidemic of typhus. And if you read the article in relation to that typhus epidemic, they didn't make nearly as big of a deal out of typhus, which is one of the most deadly diseases in human history. Millions of people have been killed by typhus. It's a horrifically deadly disease. And they kind of just blew it off like, typhus. Whereas for COVID-2, SARS-CoV-2, also known as COVID-19, what they have done has been insane. They have created a snitches get rewards program. So if you're not following the state mandate, if you decide to go outside and get some sunlight, for example, your neighbor can tell on you and you can get in trouble. This is this is the twilight zone. That's where they're trying to take all of us. They want it to get to the point where you can't trust your neighbor, but that won't be good enough. They want to take it to the point where you can't trust your brother. That won't be good enough. So they're going to want it to get to the point where you can't trust your wife. You can't trust your husband, because they might tell the state and you might get a knock on your door. And if you don't think that's happening on the other side, go to Los Angeles, because they're already there. They freak out about outbreaks of relatively harmless diseases. They screw your brain into thinking that cases are far more horrifying than deaths. That's why you always see them saying that we have new cases. At the same time, the death rate is dropping out of the sky. This is cause for celebration. So I'm not going to go to the twilight zone, and I hope that you guys will stand your ground too and help prevent us from heading in that direction. I'm not going to go to the twilight zone. I would actually rather die than go to the twilight zone. I would rather die than live in that world. And I know that now is the time to speak up. So if you're an engineer and you know something that is being misrepresented, stand up and say something about it. Now is the time. If you're a physician and you can see that something is being misrepresented, stand up and say something about it, because now is the time. Let's sum this up. There is no example in history of any vaccine ever ending a pandemic. There was not then and is not now an effective vaccine for bubonic plague, which produced by far the deadliest pandemics in known human history. There is no clear evidence separating the smallpox vaccine's contribution to decreased deaths from every other infectious disease recorded in its time, which followed the exact same trend. And yet people are being led to believe that the vaccine is the only thing we can count on to save us, by the very same people who have killed more people this year than COVID-19 itself. Here's the scoreboard. 103,339 people have been, I think this number is actually high, but that's what's been chalked up in America to COVID deaths at this time, 7 months into the year. By the end of this year, there will be 225,000 iatrogenic deaths. So the numbers are in. Not completely in, but they're mostly in. So they want to invade the border of your body and stick you with a needle, and you will need to decide, am I going to let them do this to me, or am I not going to let them do this to me? The deceitfully betrayed history of vaccine significance in relation to pandemics should make anybody question what they're saying. There are many other better and safer means to maintain wellness. The trial time has been reduced, effectively making any person who receives this vaccine a human guinea pig. Nebraska law: you cannot be stuck against your will if immunization conflicts with the religious tenets and practice of a recognized religious denomination of which I am an adherent or member, or immunization conflicts with my personal and sincerely followed religious beliefs. Personal and sincerely followed religious beliefs is almost a philosophical exemption. That's pretty cool. Just remember, you do have a choice, and all vaccines contain impurities and have side effects. Vaccines can be contaminated with other bacteria or viruses. All vaccines have side effects which can be as serious as death. Think about this. All vaccines contain adjuvants, and most contain preservatives. In a live viral vaccine, it is actually even possible to become infected with the very same disease it was designed to prevent. Nonetheless, they are going to use fear and guilt and shame and try to force against you to market their product. Imagine if used car salespeople had fake history, the media, and half of the mind-controlled society angry with you for not wanting to buy their car. You would probably just say, okay, I'll buy it. I'll buy the damn car. But what I'm trying to say to you is don't buy the car, because the wheels are going to fall off as soon as you turn onto the lot. Okay? That's what's going to happen to you. Don't buy the car. Don't buy the car. The invasion onto the surface of our skin by masks today can be the invasion into our bloodstream with a needle tomorrow. Buildings we cannot enter today without a mask may try to deny entry to us for not being vaccinated tomorrow. And this isn't the people's fault who have to check you at the door. They're just doing their job. You can't even really blame the facility because it's just marching right along with the CDC recommendation. Guess what? That's a picture-perfect example of fascism, which is corporations marching in lockstep with government recommendations. That's on the other side of the Twilight Zone. So we need to do this. Little bits at a time so that we can come back to logos, so that we can stand our ground, speak truth, and be a part of the solution in this horrendous situation that we're all living in. The people behind the mask policy are not engineers. Otherwise, we would all know that N95 masks are engineered to not filter out exhaled breath whatsoever, only inhaled breath. Surgical masks are engineered not to filter out inhaled breath whatsoever, because it is presumed that a surgical environment is sterile. And those bandanas, actually, well, I'm sorry to have to tell you they don't actually work. They don't work. I'm sorry. They don't work. I know. Now, if you are interested in protecting other people, the good news is you can wear a surgical mask, but the bad news is they're engineered to last for about 30 minutes before you have to change them out, okay? Because they do such a thorough job of filtering out your exhaled breath that after a period of time, it collects in those pore spaces, and now you're breathing back in your body's respiratory waste products, which, as Dr. Blaylock has stated, can actually, in his words, exhaled viruses will not be able to escape and will concentrate in the nasal passages, enter the olfactory nerves, and travel into the brain. That's from a physician telling you not to wear a mask, okay? There are a lot of them out there. Air enters and exits out the eustachian tube. Did you know that? Did you know that? Which means that viruses can be entering and exit through your ear canal. So if somebody shames you for not wearing a mask, you need to shame them for not wearing earplugs. Because those viruses could be flying right out of their ear right when they're talking to you. We cannot expect masks to do something they were not engineered to do, any more than we can expect vaccines to do something that they have never done for us before, and that's the presentation.